Hey, what's up? This is Cabrew, and I thought I'd make a little training video, try to help out, mostly to explain tanking. I've been in a few groups. Tanking is spotty, generally. As some people are, depending on some of the games they came from, they tank in different manners, and with every quest, there's probably a few little tweaks that you don't always see. In general, most people seem to be pretty decent tanks. It's a relatively straightforward job, but there's just like with any class, there's nuances. And so I figured I'd go over some of the basics because I like making videos and I want to have some fun, and I always like helping people. So if even one person is helped by this, I'll feel really sad because it was only one person. And I want like a bazillion people to be like, "Wow, Cab, he's so awesome." But no, I don't. I won't claim to be a pro. I do have lots of experience, so hopefully I have some things I can explain and knowledge to pass. And let's find out. Okay, first is aggro. Now, aggro generation is pretty straightforward. At its basic core, you're just trying to generate more than the next person, but it's not as simple as just taunting. It's not as there's a lot that goes into tweaking yourself for that. Now you have the primary thing is your hate as a fighter, as a tank, is your hate mod. That will adjust all of your abilities. Like in this case, I have just over 50% hate mod. So anything I do with my character, any damage, any taunting, it's boosted by 50% over the regular number. So if I have an attack that does, 1,000 points of damage, I actually generate 1,500 points worth of aggro out of that instead of, the regular 1,000. Now you can get that either by reforging if you have that expansion, or adornments. And pretty sure I have a few adornments on there. They have 5.5% hate gain on there, for example, and just kind of build it up. You will have some classes that can boost that, Dirge, for example, Coercer. So depending on your group makeup, it's a little easier than other times. There is a sort of unconventional way of tanking, depending on how you normally play. Basic tanking, the basic idea, you're in defensive with the sword and shield. With brawlers, of course, you're just dual wielding because you have an auto block anyway. You don't need a shield for that, and that's the turtling method, and which works when you're fighting really big bosses. And the idea is just to stay up as long as you can. You generate a lot less aggro, though. That's probably the least way to, the lowest way, essentially the slowest. Any of those terms, I guess, way of generating aggro. What I do, especially as a berserker, some classes it's different, but I actually tank an offensive with dual wielding. So I'm in basically a DPS stance, not using recklessness, but offensive stance. I can still take some decent hits because I don't have the incoming damage penalty that recklessness has, but with that extra damage, I'm generating a lot more aggro. The hate mod is much more effective because there's a lot more damage for it to modify, as well as the regular taunts and so on. And that's you might not think of it. Some classes might not be able to do that as well. Some classes might always want a shield, like a guardian, for example. I believe they have some shield-based abilities, if I'm not mistaken, unless that's been changed recently. But if you're not as worried about defense as you are about aggro, for instance, going through trash mobs, switching to an offensive stance with a damage spec, meaning your swords, either if you can dual wield or a two-hander, that is also a viable way to tank and generate a lot of aggro. It depends on your heals. If you're taking too much damage for the healer to compensate, just go back to a more turtled defensive mode. You can go recklessness, some tanks do. Usually you want to really outclass the mobs you're fighting. What some tanks don't realize, especially in pickup groups, is it puts a heavy strain on the healer. So the healer is stuck over-healing, essentially, and not being able to put up stuff like other damage prevention abilities, or or contribute to damage themselves, which usually isn't so much of an issue. But sometimes they're locked out of using their regular rotations because they're spamming heals just to keep up a recklessness-enabled fighter up. Because with that stance, you're taking 50% extra damage, and while you might be able to stay up, it might be, again, really straining the healer. So just keep that in mind when you start tanking for a group and you're still in recklessness. That's one thing I always check when I get into a group, is what stance am I in. I can recognize it by icon, but just because I've been playing this class for so long. But those are, and aside from gear, just getting better gear so you can do more damage, generate more hate. That's generally all there is to aggro. The important thing to watch, though, are abilities like Rescue, Cry the Warrior if you're a warrior, Insolence, anything with a position increase. Like for here, it says increases threat priority of target by 3 positions. Sometimes you have attacks that do that. Those are sometimes abilities that you want to hold off using until you lose aggro. Just because it's a good save ability. Like I have an AoE attack, but it also increases the threat priority by 3 positions for every mob I hit. So even though I want to hit off a lot of AoEs that do a lot of damage, sometimes I'll hold off on this ability a little bit just to make sure I keep aggro on everything. You'll get used to it as you group and play with other classes. Like Warlock is more likely to steal aggro, so I might have to use my AoE taunts with that. So I'd save those. If I only had single target classes, I'd just burn my AoE stuff for the damage and then save my single target taunts for in case like there's a wizard or something that's taking aggro off a single target, or rangers. And as far as aggro control, that's another thing to get used to. There are certain classes that just take aggro. They're just really good at it. Usually they're prepared for it, especially if they played the class for a while. Rangers are really good at snagging aggro. Brigands sometimes have to take aggro in order to use one of their higher damaging attacks. And then the heavy DPS classes like Wizards and Warlocks are also really good at that. A lot of times it just comes to gear, like the Scouts are heavily geared compared to the Fighters, modestly geared, then you'll run into that issue. That's pretty much it for aggro control. Okay, and next thing is you gotta pull the mob and grab aggro and position him. I'll just deal with the pulling. One of the biggest things I see is pulling a mob into the group. And for instance, if this training dummy here was the mob, and then these were the group, the tank will aggro the mob, and then he'll pull them through the group. You usually want to try to avoid that. Sometimes the mobs have AoEs, and if they get a swing off, they have an AoE attack. They'll hit the group as they're running in. That can cause a lot of problems depending on how the gear is. It could either drop members or force the healer to drop some group stuff. Usually you'll get a feel for the group after a while. But when you're pulling a mob, the idea is pull it back towards your group, and then as the mob comes running in, hit it with a stun if you can, and then position yourself on the other side. The big thing with that, as far as positioning, a lot of mobs, especially in the higher level dungeons, have the AE attack. So their auto attack always hits everything around them, or has a high percentage chance of hitting everything around them. So if I was the mob, because I have 100% AE melee attack, so I'm a mob with AE attack. This is the group. This one I have targeted right now is the tank. These are some DPS classes or bards, and then there's like, say, another scout back here. This one is the healer, and we'll say the one in the back is the mage. Now, if the tank just pulls and he doesn't turn me around, whenever I attack him, as you can see, I'm hitting 4 members of the group all at once. I'm hitting both of the flanking scouts, and I'm hitting the healer, who's a little bit too close. The mage is okay, and the scout behind me is okay. But the healer's going to have to focus on group healing, which for some classes is tougher than just single target healing. And So what you should do is, this should be the tank. He should have pulled me and then spun me around so the group can run up, the scouts can just start backstabbing me right away without having to turn around and face or turn around through the mob and still get hit by AoEs. So now if I'm attacking him, as you can see, if this was a tank, I'm only hitting the tank. My AE attack is still on, but nobody else in the group is being hit. If the scouts, and even if this was a tank here, and I was far enough away not to hit them, the scouts still have to get behind me. So they'd have to run through this AoE damage trying to get to position to backstab. That can cause problems where you might lose DPS, they might die, or they have to pop defensive abilities or move out of the way, which, you lose some damage that way. It takes it longer to take down the mob. If you're fighting a really tough mob, that can be the difference between succeeding or not succeeding. The other thing, if this was the tank and he pulled me and turned me properly, he is the one standing closest to any potential additional mobs. For instance, if this big epic one here was a wandering mob, and this is the tank, like it should be, he's standing closest to that mob, he'll get aggro first, and he's the one who should be taking the hits and getting aggro first, and it's easier for him to snatch up aggro with the AE attack, or, like one of the blue abilities that can hit all around him. If it was the other way around, where this was the tank, and there's a scout here, now the scout's stuck in the position where he's the first one who's going to be hit. So positioning, turning the mob, all very important. You don't want to wipe your group. You don't want your group to get pissed at you because they're getting hit. Like you don't want your healer to get stuck having to pop emergency heals on a trash mob fight just because you haven't spun the mob around and he's getting hammered by the AoE attacks. Because healers get in the position where they can move, but if they move, they can't heal. If they can't get out of the attack range fast enough because you ran and pulled too quickly and didn't spin the mob, they either have to stop and heal themselves where they stay in AE range, or they have to try to back up and risk not putting a heal on the rest of the group and themselves. And a lot of times that's just a lose-lose situation. It's, do I lose, 1 second later or 1 second earlier? You just solve a lot of problems by running past the mob or through the mob yourself and spinning them. That way, all of your group is safe. And then, as you can see there, instead of the scout's still in damage range, but he can just sidestep a tiny bit and be out of range. Like if I do a little tweak like that, and he's not being hit. Now, the biggest problem when you're fighting multiple mobs is that the mobs don't cooperate. They kind of clump around, they run around each other. I mean, it's semi-realistic. They can't stand on top of each other, although that does happen sometimes. But when you're pulling the mobs, the idea is just try to get as many of them as you can facing the back of the group. Like if this was a group of mobs and I'm just standing here and there's mobs all around me, their AE attacks are hitting in every direction. There's no safe spot for the scouts to go. The healer can't get close to get off some of his better abilities. You're making it really tough. So the idea, if I get stuck in a group like this, is I inch out and then get all the mobs to try to pull towards me. They'll still spread out, but it'll be in a better position than if I just stood right in the middle with mobs all around me. And when you're moving the mob, it's not as simple as just moving backwards a bunch and pulling them, especially when there's multiple mobs. Sometimes if you move, say like that, instead of just running straight forward, the mob might run around because of the pathing and wind up on your side. The best thing to do is you're aggroing the mob, just take tiny steps, baby steps. That's a secret, baby steps. Take baby steps back and until he inches forward. The only issue with that is, say the mob was just hit with a stun or a root or something like that, he won't move immediately. So just be aware that sometimes you have to wait a few seconds. The one caveat to that is that some mobs have a really long melee range. Basically, the larger the mob is, the farther away he can stand from you and still hit you. So sometimes you do have to move a far ways away in order for the mob to inch forward and position himself better. But you get used to that with practice. That's something relatively simple. But the idea of you can position yourself to keep the back towards the enemies easier than, or keep the back of the enemy towards your group it's much easier for you to do that than it is for the group to try to move all at once around the enemy. And that's pretty much the basics. Most of it just comes down to knowing the mobs, knowing what abilities they use. One of the more important things to know what abilities stun and what abilities interrupt and what abilities stifle. There's a lot of really tough AoEs that can wipe a group, or abilities that'll heal the mob that you can stop yourself as the tank just by knowing which abilities hit. Almost every tank, I think every tank, has at least one ability or one taunt that also interrupts. I know my Bruiser has his encounter-based taunt is an interrupt. For my Berserker, the single target one is an interrupt. And it's really fast casting. Like if I hit it, it's like 4 seconds and it'll be right back up. Usually you can use just the taunt on its own. What I like to do is, if there's a really important ability I have to stop, I have my stun, I have my stifle, I have another interrupt ability, and then I have some AoE stuns, which are these. The one there. Berserkers probably have a little more than some of the other tanks anyway. But you use your taunt plus one of those other interrupting abilities. And just to be sure, because sometimes the interrupt doesn't land. So just to be absolutely sure you stop it, just assume you're going to have to hit 2 abilities at once. Always hit with your taunt. When it's a fight that's really important, I make sure I move my taunt into the position where I can just hit the number 2 button in order to pop it off. That way I can interrupt that at like a moment's notice just by hitting a keyboard button. That is something you get used to, but know what your interrupts are, know what your stifles are, know what your stuns are. Timing those properly can be the difference between, wiping or being able to solo a mob on your own. A good one to practice on, actually, is the first boss in Dreadcutter. That one casts a heal called Battling Resolve. You should be able to interrupt that with with all 3, actually, your stifles, stuns, and interrupts. If you have a chance, get in there with a healer friend, maybe a healer bot, depending on how well geared you are. Just fight that mob and try to interrupt every single one of those Battling Resolves. That mob is particularly good because it also uses another ability called Resounding Blow, I believe, which you don't have to interrupt. It does some damage, sure, but it's survivable. So you get practice watching for that ability on the casting bar, while you're also trying to interrupt the appropriate ability instead of wasting it on the Resounding Blow. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any other tips for tanking, you can always let me know. Kabaru on the Crushbone server. Maybe I can make another video. Let me know if you like the video, for that matter, or if you think I was too talky or not enough diagrammy, if that's a word. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. Hopefully this is helpful to upcoming tanks. And I'll use a popular monk ability as my sign off emote. And here it goes. Bye bye, people.
No.